Reminder to everybody. Are we started? Yes, we're recording. All right. So everybody, as a reminder, our topic today is qualitative data and how to use it for quantitative testing. Our panel today is made up of 4 awesome folks, including Lee from Intuit. She has more than 9 years as a digital strategist, and she previously, I think, maybe has the record for the coolest previous work. So good job, Lee. Previously managed development of the CMS for talent blogs and the voting app for The Voice on America's Got Talent. So well done. Yeah, Melanie is currently at American Express, and she has more than 7 years in optimization and program leadership and strategy, and an additional, well, not an additional 10 years, but 10 years total of program and project management. I don't want to make you too old, Mel. So welcome back, Mel. And Carrie of Vanguard is the head of digital and client analytics, and she has more than 9 years in digital analytics and almost 20 years in e-commerce. Welcome, Carrie. And then Michael is here of Leap3, formerly AEP Convert. So if anybody saw that on there, that was my fault. I didn't convert to the new name of Leap3. Michael is an industry leader in digital analytics and optimization. And most importantly, to my heart, he is the organizer of the Digital Analytics Hub. And like I already stated, it's honestly one of the best digital analytics and optimization conferences you can attend. So if you haven't been, go. It will be worth every penny and insight that you get to bring back to your organization. So welcome, panel. Thank you so much for being here. And just a heads up, Carrie, I have your slides here. So when you're ready, if it comes up and you want to refer to one of them, just let me know and I'll be happy to share them, okay?
Terrific, thanks.
Awesome. So let me pull up our conference notes here. If I can get to them. There we go. All right, so let's get started by talking about what we mean by qualitative data, because there's a whole bunch of different types of qualitative data, and I thought maybe it would make sense if we just start by talking about some examples of qualitative data that you guys have used in whatever way connected to optimization. Maybe it's just an analysis you've done, maybe it's something you've actually applied to optimization, but just I'd like to hear what kinds of qualitative data you all have found useful in your optimization efforts. And we'll just go from left to right on our panel list here, and we'll start with you, Lee.
So Intuit being really big on customer focus, we actually do what we call Design for Delight, which is really a giant brainstorming session where we go broad with all of the ideas, and we try to bring in people from different groups because everyone kind of has different ideas, from like creative to development to just to marketing and strategy. So from there, we generally will narrow. We'll do that, take it into like user research, where we bring in focus groups. Nice thing about Intuit is there is a lab here to do user research here, but then we also partner with different companies across the country to do that. And from there, you know, in these user research, it's actually really fun in the sense that, and I say fun, not everybody would say that, because you're actually working, right? We bring in designers and writers, and we literally will iterate as we go. So what we're showing in the morning sessions could be different than what we show in the afternoon sessions, because we're iterating as we go based on some of the feedbacks we learned from our customers on how that works. And then from there, you know, we narrow, we do some more focused research. Depending on resourcing and timing, we'll also put it to UserTestingcom and get feedback from our target segments to understand how if they understand and comprehend what we're trying to put out there in the comfort of like their own home or their office, as opposed to having a researcher sitting right next to them and more or less asking a bunch of questions, you know. And a lot of times I think focus groups participants now realize there's that mirror behind, and there's people behind that mirror that would be, you know, talking to them, trying to solicit more information for that before we actually go into an actual A/B test.
Ellie, you're on mute.
I'm still on mute, yes. Thank you. I'm just talking away. I clicked mute, I just missed it. So thank you, Lee. That was really, that's awesome. That's a lot of work to get into before you even start A/B testing. So that's pretty interesting. Mel, do you want to share your experiences?
Sure. I mean, much like Intuit, MX is huge on voice of customer feedback. I think one of the pillars of our brand is having, almost like a one-to-one relationship with our card members. So that's a huge part of everything we do. So we do call listening. We do sessions bi-monthly where we listen in on calls to our CCPs to see what the pain points are. And of course we do really intense call data analyses that help reveal, some kinds of issues that people are having. Beyond that, survey responses, we can get more into, kind of what we're using for survey tools later, I think, in the topics, but we do quite a lot around surveys. We do a lot of user testing. So we're looking at those responses from user testing, and then also competitive analyses.
Unpack that a little bit. What do you mean by competitive analysis?
So we actually have a third party that we use pretty frequently to do competitive analyses. So we'll go to them with either a research question or problem and ask them to look across our competitors. Obviously, when you're talking about financial services, to be able to do that kind of analysis, you have to have accounts, all different kinds and levels of accounts with these competitors. So it gets tricky. So we use a third party to do that, and we look at what our card members are potentially seeing at other institutions, and use that also as sort of a springboard for ideation for our testing and optimization roadmap.
That's really interesting. I've actually not heard of that solution, which makes a lot of sense, because I know, working with lots of folks in the financial sector, that authentication wall really gets in the way of being able to do competitive analysis. So of course it makes sense that you would hire somebody else to do it that has that access. That's pretty cool.
Yeah. All
right. Who we have? We have Carrie next.
Can I just ask you a quick, Melanie? Who do you outsource that to?
MAPA, MAPA.
Oh, okay.
Don't ask me what it stands for. I'd have to go look it up. But that's our vendor.
Oh, cool. All right, thanks.
Yeah, they do awesome, really, really awesome.
Really?
Yeah.
That would be a big leap forward for us. We just have kind of our own accounts that we go and look at every so often.
Yeah,
competitive research. It's not real scientific. I'm getting a lot of feedback. Is that just me?
No, somebody is typing. I can't tell if you're typing. Oh, hi. Can you mute Michael?
Oh,
No worries.
Thanks.
All right.
You wanted notes. I'm making notes.
Yeah, well,
Normally Matthias does that to me.
So at Vanguard, at an enterprise level, NPS is kind of our overall qualitative metric. It tends to be very general, though, and we tend to see there's a big brand halo around it, so it doesn't give us really good feedback about like what to fix. It's also, I'm sort of bragging here, but it tends to be really high, so it also there's nothing you can do to change that number. I think it's market driven. So we do. To take it down a few levels, we do in the individual investor part of Vanguard, we've got a big digital transformation program going on, and we've spent a lot of time trying to integrate qual with quant much more. So we're doing a lot more intercept surveys, kind of at the point where we're trying to fix things, both within and without the A/B test, to understand exactly at that moment how people are feeling. We've also much more integrated our market research folks into the journey labs. So previously they'd kind of go off and do one big study and then come back and wonder why nobody did anything with it. So they're now much more integrated into the journey lab work, which means as we set up a journey, they come in and help us do basically ethnographic research. I mean, we've gone to people's houses, kind of seen how they interact in their own space with the Vanguard website, talk to them about how they're feeling, really helps us put together that journey map. We actually do, for each of the journey labs, depending on the phase they're in, we'll bring in people weekly to help vet out, what we think is the North Star of the journey, what we think are the most important capabilities. Then we'll bring in new people to kind of vet out the proposed capabilities we're putting together, the wireframes. So again, all of that before we get to the A/B test, trying to get those customer voices into the journey. We're dabbling. We just hired somebody that knows what they're doing in the text analytics space to interpret phone calls and emails. We're really looking for sentiment. Are people mad when they called after they did something? I'm not sure how far we're going to get with that. I think text analytics is harder than I think it is, but we are trying to use those sources as well to kind of mine it for organic feedback, or at least sentiment. So that's in a nutshell what we're doing.
The Journey Labs you spoke of, is that what used to be or is still Vanguard Labs?
No, they're actually separate. Actually, the Journey Labs, and at some point when we get to it, let me know. I had a couple slides on it. We're standing up integrated groups of a product owner, technology folks, design, content, analytics around a particular journey, like moving money into Vanguard or onboarding into Vanguard.
Interesting.
So we're calling it a lab because we're kind of stuffing people in the same room together. Physically in the same room.
Okay. Very interesting. All right. Well, yeah, don't let me forget because I want to hear more about that. So, Michael, you're up. You got to unmute though.
Yes, and thankfully, because I'm the last, I could write my notes before I even told you them. So and then you're not going to hear me type. So that's another advantage. So it's interesting to hear the different approaches. They in all three cases, from my point of view, sounds very structured. And I would say from either my own experience from a agency side, or possibly there's also somewhat the scale of optimization where we are in Europe compared to the US, the North American market, we're probably a little bit behind. So the kind of stuff that we tend to do is more of the smaller tactical guerrilla style, not very much big program as been described so far. It's not to say you don't find those things within in Europe, but they don't tend to be as close related to CRO. So they're more about the initial design. So sort of kind of, we need to have a new website. We'll do all of that, but not something that people use on a regular basis. And I again, you have to remember, Europe is slightly different in the sense that whilst the European Union is possibly as big as the US, we're actually looking at 27 different markets, and therefore the teams tend to be much smaller. So if Verizon would have a team in the US of 30, 40, 50 people, the equivalent Vodafone in Europe that has all across Europe may have the same amount of people, but they'll be split. So coming into what we actually do, things that I found very, very interesting, beneficial are really simple stuff like integration of survey data into analytics, both Adobe Analytics and Google. With Google, it's a little bit more difficult. What we try to do there is essentially get the sentiment and the voice of customer information, and then overlay that with their actual behavior. And that's very good tactically. It's not going to give you a strategic view of every single customer. You can't survey all of them. We found that to be very, very, very interesting in terms of ideation and understanding behaviors. You could do the same with NPS. So, but that's less for CRO. We've also used to save on costs, and Lee has mentioned doing survey groups and in labs. We've used a similar solution, which is online. So it gives you the ability to query the people on an ongoing basis. Obviously, there is a cost, but it's cheaper than bringing them to a physical place. So theoretically, you can have a focus group for 30 days, and you can expose them before and after testing. Live Minds is the system we've used here. It's a UK-based startup, but they work globally. So certainly that's something that we found beneficial. And we've done, like similar to what Carrie said, the ethnographics, reviews where...
Michael, does the Live Minds provide multiple languages? Because that's one of the
Yes.
drawbacks that we have with like UserTesting.com. They're approaching that, but they're not there. So,
well, you obviously will need to speak to them, but yes, they do. I know that I've not spoken to them for a while about how they're developing, but I remember they've done quite a lot of work in Brazil, so they had to do Portuguese. They do Spanish, Portuguese. So I don't know exactly which languages, but I'm guessing there are other competitors to that. I mean, I'm sure they're not the only ones. So, those are just some of the areas that we've played with. We also, one of the things we like is to put surveys following a test. So essentially, we will look at serving different surveys to the different versions of the test, depending on what we're trying to test. So I'm not talking about a 30-page or 40 questions, big 4C kind of style survey. It's literally one question where people could see the beginning, the end, they see the submit, so it's quick. You get higher a conversion. So if they don't see the click submit button, they will dismiss it. So those are kind of three things that we've done and been successful. Not always at the same level, but interesting. It always throws really interesting insight. The last one I also remember another one, and I'll be very quick, is obviously the integration of tools like SessionCam and ClickTail and Hotjar. With your analytics and your A/B testing. So stating the obvious, the more data you bring together and the more you can actually analyze that without drowning it, the better.
You said one thing that I want to come back to a little bit, which was that you can't survey all your customers, which is true. However, if you're surveying as representative a sample as possible, or if you're correcting for the non-representativeness of your sample, you can also look at the people who have said, I'm here for this reason, this is who I am, whatever, and use that for, like Carrie, you mentioned, you have these specific use cases, and you can have people that told you, this is who I am, this is what I'm trying to accomplish, and then you can go back and, if you tie it with your behavioral data, you can go back and say, what did they do? What actions did they take on our website or off, depending on what data you have available to them? And then you create a behavioral signature, which you can then apply to all the people who didn't answer the survey. And now you can say all of a sudden that you're actually looking at 100% of your folks, even though only, 1% or 10% or whatever of your customers actually responded to the survey. And your accuracy rate is actually pretty darn high. And that way you can target 100% of your customers, even though only a small percent actually told you who they are and why they're there. So it's a really solid way to apply that. I also want to say, Michael, that while the EU may be behind compared to what Lee, Mel, and Carrie are talking about, I think that the majority of the folks that I work with and that are in the US are not able to do this amazing ethnographic, follow me home, bring the whole bunch of people into the customer labs. They're using the easier to access and use and integrate stuff that they're getting from UserTesting.com and ClickTail and TLeaf and that kind of thing. So
that's a good point, because we all represent really huge enterprises.
Yeah, that's
a little bit
the norm.
Yeah.
But I would say, Michael, you're absolutely right. I forgot to even mention that, but integrating that survey data we integrate it into TLeaf. That's like the number one baseline thing to do. So when you get a really angry survey, you can go back and look at what their session looked like and try to figure out what happened. So that is completely the thing to do.
Awesome. Okay, let's move to the next section of questions or conversation topics that we had, and it was about use cases. And I think we got close to some of the use cases that you guys talked about how you're using your qualitative data. But let's talk about the different if you think of the end-to-end funnel of the conversion funnel, or not the conversion funnel, sorry, the experimentation funnel. You have your ideation, you have analysis, and so from the beginning to the end, where are you guys finding qualitative data most helpful? Is it in coming up with ideas? Is it in understanding results? Where are you guys using it, and how has it been most helpful?
I think for us at Intuit, it's helpful for us to narrow and determine what we would like to A/B test or even just lean into and possibly back test. Just because there's just so many ideas, there's just so many things you want to do, but you only have so much resources and time.
So you're actually using it for prioritization almost, to make sure that the stuff that you want to do is actually connected to what the customers feel needs to be done, if you will, the changes.
Yeah, and really understand, as directional learning, directionally how we would build out the experience on what we in qualitative research. We try to understand, even if the customer doesn't take the offer or doesn't agree with the experience we're building, one thing we always ask is why not? What would they want to see differently that would say, oh, maybe this is how we can get them to take the action we would like them to, right? So that's part of the nice thing about qualitative. You can also get the negative feedback too, right? To understand why they're not doing something that we're thinking this is a great design, great experience, but then you get customers who say, no. You're like, wait, hold on. Why not, right? So that we can dig deeper and kind of figure out the why behind it. I think that's helpful to make sure, directionally, we're moving in the right direction on what we're trying to build out.
Yeah, and we're using the qual sort of, for two major use cases. First is ideation. Second is for just like Lee just said, providing the why to the what. We get the what with the quant. The qual gives us the why. So, we use it pretty intensively for ideation. It's part of every brainstorming session that I do. I mean, sort of part of my due diligence before going into any brainstorming session is to pull, as much data as I can from both a quant and qual perspective. I sift through, old user testing labs and pull all the voice of customer analyses and start kind of combing through those things. When we, anytime that we have a sort of a feature or product that we know we want to go after, and then conversely, as we're sitting in these listening sessions, a light bulb will go off of this is something we should be paying attention to. So we're using it really heavily on the ideation side. And then conversely, once we have those ideas and we take them into testing, we have multiple tools available to us. We have an intercept survey tool called UserZoom that we use. If you guys are not already using UserZoom, I highly recommend taking a look. But it allows us to create custom surveys that are served up depending on the variant that you're seeing. And so we're able to get really direct feedback on on an A/B test. Of course, we're not doing that for every test. It's too labor intensive. But when we're making big changes to the user experience or introducing a new feature or product online, those are the times that we add that extra UserZoom element. But we still always have our opinion lab, which is our reactive feedback tool, which is on every page on the site. So of course people only click on it when they're mad. It just only the best and only the worst feedback goes into Opinion Lab. So we use it sort of as a diagnostic tool. We go look and see if we've created a lot of negative a lot of negative feedback, that's definitely a flag that we're looking for. And also 4C. So 4C is always on. Of course, it's running on a cadence, so not every card member sees it every time, but there's enough there. And again, all of these are integrated with our testing tools so that we know if they had qualified for the test. If they saw a test experience, we know that. So we're using those more from a diagnostic perspective and user Zoom as a true qual perspective. And it's incredible on those big strategic kinds of tests. It's really incredible to include that kind of qual insight. It changes the conversation completely with our leadership team. It gives us so much more to work with from a storytelling perspective that it creates a story that it's just undisputable almost. So we've had really good success with that.
So we use, I'm kind of with you, Lee. We have like way too many good ideas. Our backlog is way too long. So we try not to do too much ideation and focus people more on the prioritization piece. So that's more of where the qualitative feedback has been helpful, again, in that loop, kind of getting us towards true north and then vetting out the capabilities that we're proposing to launch, and then kind of vetting some of the, even just screenshots and at some point even wireframes, just to say, is this the right execution, do you think, before we go into A/B test. We've also started to use just very brief surveys. It's literally a 5-point scale of happy to unhappy within an experience before we go into the testing cycle, just a baseline kind of where are people at here in this particular page or in this particular flow, and then add that intercept survey into both test and control so we can compare it not just to A and B, but to the baseline as well. So that's told an interesting story too. In some cases, again, the baseline results have been higher than we thought. So we all get really wound up about, oh, this is terrible and we're going to fix it. And then we put out the baseline and people are like, it's not that bad. So it's, that's been really interesting, especially in the cases where senior management is like, this has to be fixed. And we're like, so that's been kind of an interesting use case. And we do have opinion labs out there, almost always people complaining, usually about the same thing. So we just kind of do a little bit of text analytics around that to make sure nothing new has popped up. We tend to have a different investment philosophy. It's more of a buy and hold. So we'll often get feedback around people want, daily personal performance and those sorts of things, and we're just not going to do it. So those are some of the feedback that we get there. We also have a log off survey, but we've realized that's kind of biased because generally when people log off, it kind of means they've done what they needed to. So we're not always getting the people that haven't figured out what they need to. So that one's kind of limited. But I think those intercept surveys have really given us a much more detailed understanding of what's going on exactly on those pages.
Okay. So I'll be more short on this because, again, there's two elements here. The fact that we're not as advanced, or we're working with smaller organizations, but equally because we are an agency side, we don't have that that ability to develop the relationships and the programs as such. So again, for us, the majority of it's much more kind of guerrilla tactics. Let's find opportunities and optimize. It's much more, we use the voice of customer much more for, it is for ideation as well, but where we find it possibly different to the other 3 use cases here is that we use it for the follow-on. So we have obviously hypotheses about why we want to test certain things and why we prioritize them. We then see the results, and sometimes the results are very revealing, sometimes they're not. And often we find also when we have multiple versions that are better than the incumbent, which to us at least suggests that we haven't reached the maxima, the ultimate maxima. We're just kind of reaching. So there's probably room there for extra optimization, and that's where if we have good survey insight, and sometimes it could be not more than 3, 4, 5 points that people make that really help us to say, hang on a minute, we haven't thought about it from that perspective. So it's much more tactical.
And it sounds almost like as you're trying to figure out why the results you saw are the way that you saw, but also based on those, what can you do next? What's your iteration? Yeah.
And again, we're less concerned about sounding terrible and not like an analyst, but in this case particularly, I'm less concerned about the statistical significance of the voice of customer. Obviously, with the testing, it's different, but it's about where do I find the opportunities, because I'm also in a different place that I constantly need to prove that the value of each and every test going forward in order to continue it. And there's still less willingness or maturity compared to North America in terms of in the investment. So that it's much more important to find those tweaks and which in a way it's also easier to do because we're not combing it all the time and over optimizing it. Not yet.
You haven't gotten all the juice out yet.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, it's interesting. All of you had really good use cases that I've seen lots of different people use, but I didn't hear any of you talking about like a recontact strategy for analysis purposes, or to like, for example, one of the use cases that I've seen in the past is, you get a survey that's pretty brief, why were you here? Did you accomplish what you wanted? How happy are you with us? Whatever. But the fourth question or the last question is always, can we contact you with further questions? And if they say yes, then you recontact them at a later date, at a time that is, approximate to your own decision, to your company's decision cycle. So you have a situation where, people buy over a 3-month or 6-month or whatever period, and you want to contact them after they're likely to have made that decision, and then find out what did they buy, and did they buy from you, or did they buy from a competitor, and how much did they spend, and that kind of thing. And I've seen that to be incredibly powerful, to be able to tie back actual offline dollars or impact to the business, new customers, new leads, and then tie it back to their online activity. So then you can say, hey, I told you internal search wasn't working, and now we have evidence that everybody who used internal search went to a competitor, or something like that, whatever it might be. There's a negative dollar impact of this tool. There's a positive impact of, using this other tool. Have any of you experienced that type of recontact strategy surveys? Not Mel?
No, we definitely don't do that.
Yeah, we don't either.
It's worth checking into. It's and at least in your case, Carrie, I know that you can connect some call center data as well, and so you can you can look at the online and the offline as far as like what decisions did they make in the call center, and then how is that tied back to what you're doing on your website, or what they're doing on the website, and what behaviors lead to calls, and that kind of thing. So it's worth looking into. Lee, were you going to say something? I didn't mean to cut you off.
So I know I don't know if it's challenging in your space, but for Intuit it is slightly challenging just because we get financial data from our consumers, so you can only contact them for certain things, definitely not marketing purposes. And I don't know, you guys also have that same legal, compliance requirement. I am curious to understand, like, for this recontacting, is it more for just a broad general industry, or how does that apply to financial industry, right? Where you don't have as much ability to just go and contact people by using their financial data.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I actually worked at Humana for a year, and you just came back in like flashing colors. I'm like, oh, I remember that. So if somebody came to the website for something related to Medicare, we could only talk to them about Medicare. And if they came, so I do remember that. And you make a good point, and I don't know what the use case would be. If anybody has one, anybody on the TLC that's in financial sector that knows how to use this type of data, that'd be a great conversation to start in the TLC, because good point. And everybody on the phone other than Michael, everybody on the panel is in the financial sector. So
I'd love to get more information if you have a use case that's related to it, so we can see how we can work that in.
Exactly. That would be really interesting. Okay, let's talk about quality of conversions really quick, because A/B testing is typically focused on increasing some kind of conversion, whether you're talking about clicks per or orders per or leads or whatever. You're looking at some kind of conversion. But often the actual conversion happens later, or the amount of the conversion or the impact of the conversion or the type of the conversion is something that you can't actually see in your A/B tool. So one of the use cases that I've seen is using the survey to evaluate, using some kind of qualitative data to evaluate like a lifetime value, or somebody remind me, what's it called when you have a group of people and you follow the group of people? Cohort analysis.
Sure.
Thank you. You can do a cohort analysis to find out if the changes that were presented to the different recipes were presented and how those impacted the cohorts and their decision making over time. Have any of you experienced any of that, or can think of any use cases relevant? That's a lot of silence, guys.
Not on the qualitative side. I mean, we've definitely done the cohort analysis work on the quantitative side to understand how people's behavior changes over time. We use it a lot with new clients. What does that first 90 days look like?
You haven't looked
not
at
on
the relationship with the brand, or how their qualitative responses on to the surveys have impacted the conversions over time.
No, not over time. I'm not sure that
that's your sign, everybody. I want somebody to do that, because I think it would be fascinating to look at a tie between what customers are telling you and what they're doing over time, and how that affects the relationship. So somebody go do it and then come talk to all of us about it, because I think it'd be really interesting.
That sounds so super sophisticated. I'm just trying to figure out how logistically that works. Are you just asking the question to your survey recipients? How does this impact your impression? Or are you actually trying to track that responder over time?
I think you can do it in the same way that we look at the NPS, and I do put that in air quotes, and I know several of you use it, but as I think Gary, you mentioned, it's only as valuable as it is changeable, and it's not really always changeable. But that idea of how satisfied are you with your experience? How satisfied are you with our company? How likely are you to recommend? And then you take the people that are super, super happy and the people that are super, super sad, and you look at what they did on the website during that visit. You look at what experiences and the tests that they were focused, presented. And then over time, in a cohort analysis, you follow those people and see how their behavior changes, and where possible, you re-give them the survey, and you see how their relationship with their perspective of your brand changes over time. I would be very curious to do that. Yeah, Michael.
If I understand it correctly, because Katie, I understand why we want to do it. I think it's a great idea. We actually not do something similar, but with our clients, and we survey them on how our service is, and not how good they are, but rather how they're impacting the organization. So I understand where you're coming from. I'm trying to understand though how you're relating that specifically to CRO, to testing, because that is something that is not really just, ultimately it's optimization, it's general, but it's not specifically
necessarily A/B, right?
To the CRO, which is not, optimization is not just A/B, but I'm just curious how you're seeing that, because to me it's just customer satisfaction, full stop.
So from the way that I am envisioning it in the way that I've seen it done one time, and the reason that I have the idea is because when you have a long running test, maybe it's running because it's a targeted experience or a machine learning where you just set it and go, whatever the situation is, but you have it running and you want to make sure that it is working on the long run. So you capture in the cookie what experience the visitor got, and you also give them that survey. And then every time they come back, they're getting the same experience, and you're seeing how that affects them over time. And then the really interesting piece for me is if you end the test that they qualified for, and they come back, is their behavior now different than it was before they qualified for the experience? So you're evaluating the touch points. To me, it's more valuable in a space like financial sector where people are coming back frequently. And they're doing different things. And each time they come, there are different reasons. And what if you've done something that made part of the funnel better? And you know that because you've got the quantitative data. But if you looked at this over time as a cohort, you find out that you actually heard another part. I just think that would be really interesting.
So I know Intuit does cohort analysis, and some of our analysts does. I don't know all the logistics. I know Dylan's on, and he may be able to provide some more insight since he's been here longer. But, I know like we do have a team that does go and look, look at our NPS score and some of our survey data. We do contact some of them that says it's okay for you to contact us.
Mm-hmm.
If they sign their waiver to say that they can contact us and try to get a little more details. I mean, to your point too, like, these are customers who want to come back and use use TurboTax year over year. So we want to understand, like, where in the funnel if they're having any issues or why they wouldn't come back, right? Every industry has deflectors, people who only as a one-time user, and you want to retain them. And I think the cohort analysis will help you understand that also.
Yep. Yeah. I'm just noticed the clock. You guys are fun to talk to, and it's an interesting conversation, but we're down to 7 minutes remaining. And I have one more question that I wanted to get out there, and then give all of the folks on the phone a chance if you have questions. In fact, if you have questions as we're discussing this next question, go ahead and type them into the chat, and that way I can just go right there, or just be thinking of them and get ready to go off mute. So the final question that I have is about using A/B testing technologies to optimize your surveys or other voice of customer. So have you guys done A/B testing, quantitative testing on your qualitative entry points to find better ways to get more responses?
You mean like where to put the survey or the questions on the survey?
How to pop the survey, who to ask, what questions, the length of the survey, all the interaction. I mean, everything. Think about everything that we test on the website. You could probably also test in many cases in your survey, and then you could increase response rate. I heard somebody, Carrie, you said it's not as good to pop the survey at the end because they're already leaving. They've done what they wanted to do. It's better to do an intercept survey. How do you know that?
That's because we tried it. And we are actually doing some testing around where to put the survey on the page. I mean, one thing that we've found, and this isn't super quantitative, but we found that the pop-up survey is more invasive and less likely to get used than an inline survey, like something that just happens on the page. And we've also found that less is more. So 3 questions max, happy faces, just to get, 5-point scale, happy or not happy, tends to get more higher completion rate. And we've also found that the wording on some of the questions is confusing. So we've tested like different sets of questions. Usually like 1 or 2 questions are the same, and then 1 question differs across the population. And we've actually seen less completion rates on certain questions that you can just look at and go, okay, that was confusing. We didn't write that correctly. So we have actually been testing some of that, not in a super formal way, just in a more, hey, that one looks better than that. Like, let's try it. So we actually need to get a little bit better and more formal at that, because we have seen a difference in completion rates.
We haven't been doing that, but I think that's a fantastic idea. So what we do is again, we may have different surveys. The surveys could be tied to the version of the test, but not the other way around, which is a great idea. I really like that idea.
And I think if I'm understanding correctly, Kelly, you're saying the use case in terms like, the survey you're popping up is like, did this experience work, not work? Would you use it? Right? Is that kind of that use case you're talking about, and using the A/B test tool to validate that?
Absolutely. What can we do to increase the response rate of your surveys? Yep.
And I know we ran a test last year, and I don't know if Dylan, you recall, it was for, we did that with I believe it was for self-employed. It was a new feature we were trying to build out. And they built the experience, and what they did was, if the customer said no, we used A/B test. We did pop up a part of the A/B test was a survey of like why, was it good, was it bad, and what would make you actually move forward with that, in that sense of like to determine, from that response for the customers who didn't convert, what would they change in that experience and that feature.
Gotcha. All right. Let's see. We've got a question from Ben on the Recontact survey for me. What do you do to remove the bias from these? Yeah. So first of all, you got to evaluate if there is bias. You need to, just like you would do with any sampling, you would evaluate everything from the demographics to the behavioral composition of your sample and compare it to your population, and then you just make adjustments. So it's not removing so much as it is adjusting for. Does that make sense, Ben? I don't see audio for Ben, but any other questions? Carrie, I know you had slides that we didn't get to. Is there any that you want me to pop up for?
Oh, not at all. I just wasn't sure how much background you wanted.
No problem. Is it okay with you if I send it out with the notes in case anybody has questions? And can folks contact you through TLC or email?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
And Carrie, I'm probably going to contact you on your text analytics and try to get sentiments from call, because that's interesting for Intuit. So I am kind of interested in like some technical background and maybe possibly some vendor, and I'll contact you separately about that.
Oh, absolutely.
I think one thing we didn't cover is, I know we actually have a social team that actually goes and looks, for the voice of customers, that this team will look through all of the social posts on, Facebook, Twitter, and kind of try to glean a story. They actually will even look at like some of the product reviews we have on Amazon to get feedback on voice of customers as well. And I am curious to see how if there are other people who do that as well, and how are you guys using it?
I think that's a great question, and I'll put it out with the notes since we're at 1 minute remaining. But I do want to talk more about the social and what you get from social, because much like the opinion labs, you tend to get only the really, really happy and the really, really sad. And so how do you control for that, which speaks, Ben, to your the bias piece that you just messaged about. There's a definite bias, and the people who are willing to respond to a survey in general are different people than the rest of your organization. So you have to evaluate for that. And for everybody on the panel, when we talk about this last part that we were just discussing about using optimization to evaluate your survey, I think that's one of the things we should evaluate is what kinds of things can we do to increase the survey take rate for a sample of our population that is more representative of the population. And I think, Carrie, what you mentioned, fewer questions and ask it in the right place, and but I think that is something that we should be evaluating, is not just take rate, but take rate of the right audience. Just like we talked about, it's not just about conversion, it's about the quality of conversion. I think that the same is true when we're talking about obtaining qualitative data. So Anyway, thank you, everybody. Really, really fantastic conversation. I think I did a better job taking notes, even though I had to go on and off mute a lot. So I'll get the notes out a lot faster this time, I promise. And Melanie, thank you. Thank you for doing it last time. I really, really appreciate it. And everybody, I hope you have a great weekend. And I think our next conversation is actually in January, just because of all of the holidays. So everybody have a fantastic holiday, and we'll see you in the new year. Bye, everyone.
See you. Thank you.
Happy
Thank
holidays.
you.
Thank you.